section, basically so that the setback at the upper level is the same as the extension going back. And I think that would address the neighbor's concern to some degree about light. And for me, it's just a big blank wall that I think is pretty unattractive. Your other comments about how the work gets done, it's usually by mutual agreement. Usually neighbors grant access temporarily to allow people to work on a house where there's no other space. Usually scaffolding has to go up or something, but that's all by mutual agreement between private parties. The city doesn't really have anything to do with that. I'm not so concerned about the balcony either. And there is a solid panel on the north side, so at least there's a little privacy screening there.
Was that solid on the north side?
Yeah, it looked like
on the
like
balcony?
solid wood on the, but not to the back where the applicants would be looking out at the back. So I would suggest we require them to reduce or not allow the extension, because I can't really make the finding in terms of bulk and all that, that it wouldn't have a negative impact on the neighbor extending it vertically above the existing wall. I'm okay with the wall existing where it is, and filling in the notch is fine, but I don't like it extending higher than that.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Great, thanks. I do have a few additional comments that I'd like to share on this. Appreciate all of the comments that my commissioners have made. For me, I, at least on the issue of the conditional use, or the parking exception I have no issue with, so I feel like we can solidly make those findings. So I'm really focusing my comments mostly on the conditional use. And here to me, it's a sort of a balancing game. The volume of existing non-conforming wall that's being removed and made compliant is greater than the net new non-conforming wall that's being added. So to me, it's basically a surface area calculation equation in terms of balancing the impacts on the neighbors. So more of the non-conforming wall is being set back than is being introduced. And so in terms of sort of the impact on the one, and it's really to me all about sort of that one adjacent neighbor who's most affected. I don't think this will really have any impact on anyone else. It's about, let's call it 28 feet back from the front wall of the building, which is set back a good distance from the street. So I don't think anyone from the public realm is going to be seeing this. It's really the one neighbor who's right there. So I do think on balance, there's enough of the building that's being sort of remedied and put into the right place. The wall currently, other than the one-story portion that has a light well, because it doesn't appear to go all the way to grade, there are no windows on that entire facade. And so the portion that's being set back is being both articulated by the setback and having the introduction of some glazing, which I think, again, is on balance an improvement over the existing condition. So for me, I feel like I can make the findings for those reasons for the conditional use. Although perhaps it's not 100% necessary for, every foot of height here for that detail, I do think on a small building like this, interior volume can make a really big difference on a very narrow property for the interiors. I similarly have a very narrow house, and I understand what sort of height and volume can bring to an otherwise really narrow space in terms of the livability, which is one of our other sort of objectives in our design guidelines. So for those reasons, I feel like I can support the project as proposed. So I think at this point, it's a question of if somebody up here would like to make a motion one way or the other. I think we've got some split decisions.
Could I just ask the applicant if you would be willing to change the roof level there, or could we have her respond?
Sure.
A good question.
So I went back and looked a little bit more carefully, and we would only be able to bring that front elevation in by about 1.5 feet before we hit the head clearance. And we went through several rounds of, on the one side of the staircase that's going up. And we looked at like popping in a elevated skylight and trying to get the volume, and coming back over and over again to having just a really nice experience of a stairwell, that we have some sunlight coming in, you're connected to the downstairs, you're connected to the upstairs. It's a little bit more generous on a very, very tight space. So if we were to pull it in the way I think you're proposing, it doesn't quite take care of the head clearance. We have to have some pop-up somewhere over the upper portion. And I can show you where that is if you would like to see it in the drawings.
Well, it looked like the stairs were going down from that point, not up. So.
It's a split level, so we're trying to design this stairwell so that the both the up and down feels like it's encapsulated in one space. So we don't want to drop the ceiling over one area and raise it over the other because it'll feel disjointed as an experience. The goal is to keep it open.
I think there was one other section drawing at the very bottom that probably showed it pretty well.
It's a 3.5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does cut through the transverse section, I think, yeah. There's one more down, one more.
Oh, nope, that was it.
Okay.
So you can see we have about this much room that we can pull this in before we hit the head clearance, and that's
Yeah.
about, I don't know, 18 inches, 2 feet at the most. It doesn't allow that front wall to actually be completely flush. So
That
this,
stairwell is in like 3 feet from the outside wall, right? Isn't that the one that
right, so
goes up? So the 3 feet extension on the other side doesn't really impinge on that stairway.
So what we would end up with is an elevation that comes out and then back.
Well, it would be more awkward in the elevation.
It's more awkward.
Anyway, maybe, so if you look at I mean, it's going down. If you go 3 feet to the north, you're going downhill, downstairs, and it doesn't need the head height. I mean, there are lots of ways to deal with a little bit of a headroom issue. You know. Can you go down one more drawing, please? See, I'm looking at,
Here.
yeah, I mean, your head height issue is on the right side of the stairwell, not on the left, where the extension is. So, I mean, over that stairwell, you have like 12 feet going down or more. So I'm just wondering, I mean, I get the problem. You want to create a coherent interior space, but it's impacting your neighbor to some degree. So, I mean, it is a trade-off, but we don't need to labor the point anymore.
Sure.
We just need to vote.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I will say that I think with the additional explanation, I'm comfortable that we can make the findings that we need to on the conditional use as it's presented. So,
Did you want to make a motion on that?
yes, I would move. Did you? Sorry, did
I
you
was just going
wanna
to say, we can also apply a scoring pattern or additional detailing to the exterior of that wall so that it doesn't feel as much as a big flat wall.
Okay. Well, I think that might be a nice thing to do, but I don't think we'll condition it. So I will move approval of planning application 19059, project at 834 Evelyn.
All right, I'll second.
All right.
I'm just sensing there's no support for having them lower the roof there. Is that what
Well, I think there's a motion and a second on the floor, so we can call individual commissioners here instead of a roll call vote. Why don't we go?
I just wonder if it would be worth offering an amendment or.
I don't think there's support for said amendment.
Go ahead.
We can go ahead and do an individual call vote. So commission on that vote, on that motion, Commissioner Donaldson,
Aye.
Commissioner Jennings,
Aye.
Commissioner McLeod.
I will support it, yes.
All right, and I vote aye as well. So that motion to approve as proposed passes unanimously 4-0. And just a reminder to keep the story polls up for the full 14-day appeal period. So that concludes our consent calendar. That now takes us to item 5 on our agenda. That is public comment. This is public comment for members of the public to address the commission on an item that is not otherwise agendized. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on an item not on the agenda? All right, seeing none, public comment is closed, and we'll move on to agenda item 6. These are discussion and possible action items. First up is item 6-1, planning application 18-037. This is a parking reduction and subdivision map for a townhouse project at 634 Kains. And Commissioner Donaldson, did you have a recusal?
Recuse myself for being 498 feet away.
All right, with that, we'll wait for Commissioner Donaldson to step out. And on this one, we're having a staff presentation. Yeah, okay. Great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Good evening, Chair Waddy and members of the Commission. I'm Jean Iceberg, the consulting planner on this item. So just a little recap since we met September 11th. The discussion this evening is focused on the tentative map and the proposal for a parking reduction. At that September 11th meeting, the Commission made a motion and approved the resolution regarding the density bonus ordinance and the design review application, and so we're not discussing those further tonight, but they will be forwarded to the council for their approval. So just a reminder about the site location at Portland, Kains, and San Pablo Avenue, this sort of L-shaped site with the restaurant on the plan left side and the parking lot serving the restaurant on the right. Just a quick overview of the project, existing on top, proposed down below. The proposals for 9 attached townhouses, 1 below market rate unit to meet the inclusionary requirement, and also proposed under state density bonus law. The proposal includes a lot line adjustment to create a lot for the 9 units, which we'll talk a little bit more about when we get to the condo map, replacement of the street trees, and again, our focus tonight, the 2 bolded items on the restaurant parking and the tentative map. So at the September 11th meeting, in addition to the approvals of the density bonus ordinance and design review resolution, the Commission and a public commenter both raised the questions about the compliance of the restaurant parking, and so we'll be addressing that tonight. And then I've just bolded here some of the design comments from the Commission. The staff report goes through these in detail and talks about the applicant's responses. I'm just focusing on briefly, it's a little bit hard to see here, but just wanted to mention one thing. There was a number of comments about the provision of bicycles and a desire for cargo bikes and where the trash was located, and the applicant has revised the design of the garage to make more room for the bike parking, so you can see a cargo bike shown here in addition to other bikes, and the stairs were shortened to allow the trash, recycling, and compost to be located under the stairs in the garage. Another thing that's happened since the September meeting, the Parks and Recreation Commission heard the proposal for the street tree removal. The Commission was not able to make a decision, but did make a motion in their recommendation to the Council. And so they stated that they recommended retaining the existing mature trees if possible, and this means that if the street trees do not obstruct the new driveway curb cuts, recommending that they be maintained. So far, it looks like the applicant is not going to be able to do that, but we'll continue to look at that. They recommended replacing removed trees on a 3-to-1 basis, recommended expanding the tree wells, and recommended consulting with the city's urban forester to look at another species besides the crepe myrtle. The Commission, you may recall, had the same comment at our last meeting about the tree species. So we'll continue to work on this before we get to the City Council. So I mentioned City Council, so just a reminder here that this whole project is going to City Council based on a recommendation from the Planning Commission because of the tentative map, which gets approved at the council level, and the density bonus application. So it'll all get wrapped up together to go to council. So this is the tentative map, the condominium map, showing the 9 condominium parcels, the 9 townhome units. This is still under review by the city engineer and their consultants. There is a condition of approval consistent with the city's subdivision ordinance. If there are minor changes in the condominium map that need to be made in response to the city engineer comments, those can be made at a staff level. If there's something that raises to the level of more of a major change, it would come back to the Commission. So the restaurant parking, I'm going to go into this in some level of detail. So right now, the current code requirement for restaurant parking is 1 per 200 square feet. Based on the size of the existing restaurants, this requires 29 off-street spaces. There are currently 51 parking spaces provided on the site, and this includes the shared parking with the Taco Bell restaurant next door. There is an informal shared parking and driveway access agreement between the two properties. It has never been formally recorded with the county, and though the city's known about it for a long time, we've essentially made the determination not to recognize it because it's not formalized. There was a variance approved in 2007 reducing the parking on the Taco Bell site and requiring Taco Bell to provide 7 spaces. So we have taken that into account in this analysis. Okay, so this is the existing parking configuration. This sort of gray area shows the property at Taco Bell and the informal shared parking spaces there. The proposal. So the requirement, again, is 29 spaces. What's being provided is 24 spaces at our subject site. Taco Bell is only showing 6 spaces right now. They've shifted a space. They've kind of moved their trash, and the space that was in front of the trash is now cannot be occupied because the garbage trucks have to access that space. We're not dealing with that as part of this application. We may need to deal with that separately because they're not meeting that requirement. But in any case, the proposal here, which is consistent with a request that can be made under the zoning ordinance, is to reduce the required parking from 29 spaces to 24 spaces, so a reduction of 5 parking spaces. So this is the future proposed site plan. Here's our housing development, and these are the 24 spaces. This row and this row on the upper, or the western side of the plan. These are the Taco Bell 6 spaces. So in order for the commission to adjust parking requirements, the commission has to make a series of findings to determine that parking demand is less than the required number of spaces, that the long-term occupancy of the property will not generate substantial additional parking demand, and that a reduction of the parking requirement will not have a substantial effect on the parking available for neighboring uses. And so the city has a specific way that we do this in terms of surveying off-site parking, on-street parking adjacent to the site within a 500-foot distance. And so staff did that over a number of days last week, looking at lunchtime hours and dinner time hours when the restaurant was open to survey on-street parking. On a Thursday at lunchtime and dinner time, determined that there was 50% occupancy, 50% availability on the streets bounded by the west side of San Pablo, Garfield Avenue to the north, Stannage to the east, and Washington to the south. On Friday, the occupancy was higher at 77%, but still within the 80% threshold of an acceptable amount of parking, generally at least 1 space available per block on average. So staff believes that these parking findings can be made. Just wrapping up, some notable conditions of approval. I mentioned if there are any amendments to the tentative map that come up with the city engineer's review, that according to the subdivision, those can be made at staff level. Requirement for the final map to be approved prior to the project being completed. I just wanted to mention the affordable housing agreement that will need to be approved by city council for the inclusionary unit and making sure that's affordable in perpetuity. And then lastly, a construction management plan to ensure that traffic, circulation, access, parking are all handled during the construction of the project. In terms of correspondence, the Planning Commission received 1 email regarding the project talking about policy consistency in the general plan, concerns about a lack of compliance with the daylight plane setbacks and the density bonus waiver, the front yard definition, and the restaurant parking. So again, staff's recommendation is to adopt Resolution 2019-13, forwarding a recommendation to the City Council to approve the tentative map and parking reduction. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
I had one quick question for you. On the parking survey that was done, Is the actual, I know it's an on-street parking survey that we usually do. In this instance, because there is a large off-street parking that's already there and that's sort of at question, was there any analysis done to what the amount of the property's off-site parking was during those same timeframes? You know, was the street parking more heavily used than the parking lot, or?
The parking lot was definitely occupied. I think, there were probably a couple spaces that were available, but particularly when I went out on Thursday, that south side of Portland was completely empty, had complete availability of on-street parking.
Got it, okay.
And, we did go out at a few different times, and even the days that the restaurant is closed on Wednesdays, there's still parking in that off-street lot. So our assessment is that other people are just using it too, since there's parking available there. It's a big lot.
Okay. Thanks. Any other questions of staff? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Commissioner Jennings.
I have a question. So could you go back to one of the figures showing the parcel? There we go. That's a good one. So is it correct that the only legal access to the parking lot would be through the Taco Bell property?
We still
Or is
have
there a curb cut there? I couldn't tell on
this.
this.
If you can see where my cursor is on plan left on the south side, excuse me, the south side of the site, there is an existing curb cut to be retained.
Oh, there is, okay. Yeah, that wasn't totally clear to me from the tentative map, so I guess I would, anyway, we can come back to that, but I would just want to make sure
Okay, I see.
if that shows on the tentative map.
Okay.
Okay, and then, so just to be clear, the reason this is going to council is we require council approval of a tentative map and density bonus, okay.
And the affordable housing agreement.
Oh, yeah, the affordable housing agreement. that's
Okay.
coming.
But is the affordable housing agreement actually going to council right now, or is it just going to be a condition of approval?
It actually,
Officially, right now, it's a condition of approval, but the applicant does have the option of preparing that agreement in advance of the council hearing.
Okay.
So when the full package of entitlements goes to them, they could also take action at the same time on the housing.
Okay, but we haven't seen that, and we wouldn't act on it, okay. Yeah, I also was curious, like Commissioner Waddy, about the use of the existing lot, but I think you already addressed that, so those are all my questions for now.
Any questions of staff from you?
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, the question before us tonight is pretty strictly limited to the map and recommending them that council either sending a recommendation to council and no comments about architecture or setbacks or daylight plane. We could
Yeah, that's correct. We
discuss it,
didn't-
but it's not any decision-making.
Yes, and strictly speaking, we actually didn't have language in the notice to deal with the design review or density bonus that was previously brought to commission. We noticed it strictly as the tentative map and the parking.
Fair enough.
All right, with that, then is the project applicant here to speak on the project? Thanks.
okay, do I have her slide if she wants?
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Lisa Vilhauer with Brana Development. We are here. We don't have a presentation prepared, but we're happy to answer any questions, and we have our project team here as well.
Great. Any questions for the applicant before we turn it over to public comment?
Well,
Go ahead.
I guess in previous presentations, we've had proposed multi-family project shown on the restaurant site, and I don't know, is that still something that's kind of feasible or in the planning process or something?
I think the only reason that was shown was a question from staff showing that a project could still be built on that site with this subdivision. So with the lot line adjustment and splitting this project out, it's still feasible to have another project. We're not involved in anything on that site.
And I guess my question is whether the owner has some long-term intention to develop that as housing, or whether it's going to pretty much planning on staying as a restaurant, because there was one question about the findings and long-term use and how that might affect that decision in terms of the parking.
Yeah, that's a good question. And
So maybe you could address that, or I don't know if the owner's here.
well, and the owner is here and he's just
He just turned in a speaker.
figure out, so maybe he can address it too. But for now, we have not had any proposals about the other portion of the site. And the reason that we provided, or we had asked the applicant to provide that kind of conceptual drawing of how the remainder L-shaped portion of the site could build out was specifically because of the split zoning that will end up on that parcel, to make sure that the San Pablo Avenue, the SPC zone and the R3 zone could be feasibly built
It
out.
was basically illustrative.
It was illustrative,
Okay,
yeah.
not really an actual.
No, it
long-term
wasn't a
idea
proposal.
of a proposal or anything. Okay, fine, thanks.
Did you have any questions for the applicant?
Well, I'm hoping either you or the owner, someone from the applicant team, can just talk a little bit about the use of the current parking lot and whether, for the existing restaurant use or, foreseeable future uses of that site. I would like to see some kind of evidence or analysis that we think, that it is enough. And I recognize we have information in the record about the off-site parking, but.
I'll let the owner address that.
Okay, thank you.
So maybe if we could have the owner come up and respond to Commissioner Jennings' question? Sure, thank you.
Hi, my name is Nan Lee. I own 634 and 1113 Portland. So actually I own 665 San Pablo Avenue, original back in 2005. I'm owned by that time by Sizzler. So when I see the parking lot, and then in the Kains Avenue, right now you look at very bad shape. All them dumping, homeless, all junk. So right now, all them tree, we got a 4 or 5 tree there. The root come up, buck up the street, the right-way street. So, and then I think about it. I see architect David Tredenbach. He built one building down in Cornell. So I talked over with him. So we have a good idea to build the townhouse on the Kains. So you look from corner, on the corner street, all the way to Marine Street, the Kains Street. Only that black. Only that behind the wall up at 665, look at bad shape for the Albany city. The Albany city, the value, I love it. I lived back in 1977. I love the Albany. So I would like to look in with David Tredenbach, and then I will be hand over. I'm owner. After overall, I will be hand over the roof of Lucky House, Lisa, the quality builder. Owner, we be owner. I'm not owner anymore after the partial clear. So you look at right now and look at the plan. So make a city, Albany city, look much, much better. Standard, somebody against it. But again, bad. Don't against it, a good thing for the city. If you love the Albany city. Thank you. Thank you.
Anything else? Yes. Okay. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and open it up then for public comment. And did we have any other speaker cards?
We have one speaker card, Ed Fields.
Okay, Mr. Fields, please come on up.
Good evening, Commissioners. I am going to talk about some other issues. There's a 50 by 100-foot corner lot in my neighborhood, 4 units in a row fronting on Kains Avenue. The owner could not put up a fence on the shorter side yard because our old code language considered that short side the front yard. This is one small reason why the code was changed. Unfortunately, when the commission voted on the changed language, they only changed it in one place, yard front, and they missed lot corner. The intent was that the community development director could make the sensible decision in all cases where it might be necessary, not just on corner lots, as you can see from the language I provided in my comment letter. By approving a 67-foot deep lot tonight, the applicant will have only a 9-foot setback for 135 feet of frontage on Kains Avenue, with eight front stoops and 9 garages on Kains Avenue in clear nonconformance with the language expressed in the general plan and the zoning code, which, again, I provided. The language I quoted in section 2024-070B, setbacks with daylight planes, exterior property lines at streets abutting residential districts, makes no mention of front or side yards. Only footnotes which reference that section might imply it only applied to front setbacks. And the commission in 2009 also tried to avoid zoning by footnote, but they weren't entirely successful. The Cornell-Brighton 4-unit project does not appear to go above 28 feet at the setback line on Cornell, which is considered the side yard, and it's only an 8-foot setback. It would be nice to have story poles, if that's at all possible, because of the nature of the shortened setback, but it's difficult. It's difficult to go up 35 feet, I recognize that. You've read my comments on the parking situation. At least 20 spaces will be removed from the existing parking. One could argue that the code language in section 2028-040B1C, which I didn't put in my letter, means that you are actually approving a parking reduction of 20 spaces, which you could do, I guess, anyway. So you're also going to be removing on-street parking on Kains and adding 9 3-bedroom units. So there's going to be a very severe impact to parking in the neighborhood. I'm not suggesting that we use that impact as a reason for not building more housing and for not building this project. But I do think it's important to take into account that severe impact. And there was no mention of how many on-street spaces will actually be available for the 20 lost spaces. And one last comment. It says in the box on top of page 3 of the staff report that the trees can stay, but then everything else implies they're going to be replaced. I know that's a question for the council, but I want to bring it up. 4 of the 5 street trees don't block the proposed curb cuts. So thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other folks who would like to speak during public comment?
Just want to respond quickly. In terms of any proposed future uses, those would obviously have to comply with the conditional use or that use at that time. So if it were to turn into residential, it would have to comply with the parking regulations of residential at that time.
Great, thank you. All right, so with that, we'll go ahead and turn it back to discussion with the commission. Either of you guys want to start with your thoughts?
Sure. Well, and recognizing that our scope tonight is narrow and we're not reopening the design discussion, really are focusing on the parking reduction and the tentative map. I don't have any substantive comments about the tentative map aside from just making sure that we're showing there is legal street access, which it may be on there. I just didn't think it was very clear. So trying to clarify that on the map. With respect to the parking, frankly, I would have liked to see just a little bit more analysis about why this will not have a significant impact on the neighborhood or the existing businesses. And I would encourage the applicant, assuming we move this forward with a recommendation to council, I would encourage the applicant to work with staff to actually build out that discussion a little more, because I think we can make the findings we need to on that, but just barely. It is a significant reduction in what's there right now, and I recognize that not all of the spaces that are there right now are necessary for code and probably not necessary in practice and may be used by others. But we're kind of being asked to make a lot of logical leaps or fill in those gaps ourselves. And I would encourage you to try to make it easier for the council to be able to make the findings on that. So aside from only being slightly convinced about the parking, I am supportive of the project. And again, with the narrow scope that we're looking at tonight, I would be prepared to move forward with a recommendation that this go to the council.
Commissioner McLeod, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I agree. I think it would help to have a little more rigorous parking analysis. I mean, maybe actual numbers. I guess the real question is whether 24 spaces is sufficient for the restaurant. And I have no way of really objectively saying for sure, but I intuitively think it should be fine. And, you know, partly based on the survey you have done, you know, it seems like there's plenty of on-street parking most of the time. Evenings seem a little different. Was there an evening study done? Yeah, so it was 7 p.m. Usually when residences fill up, residential streets fill up, and then dinner time, what time was that? Like 7? Yeah.
If there's any insight I can provide, a lot of the businesses on the west side of San Pablo, which are more daytime businesses, are closed up. And so when doing the assessment, that west side of San Pablo was
Right, the retail, a lot of those stores shut down, right, fair enough, so it's a transfer. As far as eliminating the parking that's on the proposed development site, I have absolutely no problem getting rid of that parking lot. This housing development is 100%, you know, a great project, and it's what the city needs in terms of housing, and I'm really happy to see that happening. We have very few developments of this kind, and we need more of them. That's why I would love to see housing development on the restaurant site at some point. And as our zoning code evolves, we're revamping it as part of our work plan for the next year. You might revisit that as a project because the conditions, the zoning ordinances will change and give you more opportunity to make a better project, I think, and provide more housing. So I really have no problem approving this and sending it forward to council with the recommendation of approval. I don't see any downside to it. 5 spaces is pretty minimal for the restaurant as a reduction. So I have no problem with that.
Great, I'll just wrap up on this. I agree that I think sort of intuitively the number of resulting parking spaces, again, just sort of from my experience, I grew up a couple blocks from here and have seen it over the years from when it was the Sizzler to the current Vietnamese restaurant, that I've never, in my experience at least, seen it anywhere close to full. I think I've always been able to pull in there and park, and it typically is on sort of prime time, Friday, Saturday, Sunday night, and dinner timeframes. So, you know, it was good to see the parking survey on the city streets, but I do think this is sort of an unusual site in terms of the availability of off-street parking. I think typically when we're tasked with looking at these parking surveys, it's more typically, you know, on Solano or other places like that where there isn't really any off-street parking and you're solely reliant on the off-street parking. And I think this is a bit different here because folks do have that option and there's a pretty abundant amount of parking. And I similarly, you know, this is a necessary step to get the sort of associated project approved, which is, I think, a great project that I'd like to see move forward. And, I mean, I guess I would add, just more so for curiosity's sake of, you know, double checking our work in sort of the real world. I think it would be interesting once this parking is blocked off. I would imagine once the parcel is done, even before there's construction happening, I imagine some sort of roping off or chaining off of the parking or something. But whenever that moment happens where that parking's no longer available, that maybe we get a report back to the commission just at, you know, what the parking capacity is. Again, it's sort of similar moments in time, but on the off-street parking, just so that we have a sense of whether we are in fact making the right type of decision here when we allow a parking reduction. I would just find that as interesting sort of food for thought. But regardless, I think this is a good project and can support the findings associated with the parking reduction, as well as the tentative map. So I am happy to move this forward with the recommendation to City Council. And so we need to make a motion to recommend the resolution to Council.
Yeah, so you'll be adopting Resolution 2019-13, which would forward a recommendation to the council on the map and parking.
Great.
Motion?
Sure. I will move to adopt Resolution 2019-13, forwarding a recommendation that the City Council approve the tentative map and parking reduction.
I'll second.
All right, on that roll call vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Seeing none opposed, that recommendation for a resolution passes 3-0, and we will be moving that on to City Council. So that takes us to the next item on our agenda, which is item 6-2. This is planning application 19-064, conditional use and parking waiver for the Blue Bear School of Music. And this comes with this is just a review for staff, from staff, or is this an action item?
So if the commission decides to take action tonight, you do have conditions and findings.
Okay. Okay. So with that, we'll turn it over for a staff presentation.
Good evening, everyone. Once again, this is planning application 19-064, conditional use permit and parking waiver for Blue Bear School of Music, located at 1407 Solano Avenue. Some background on the property. The subject property is a 10,214 square foot lot located in the Solano Commercial Zoning District with an existing 6,500 square foot commercial building built in 1927. The building currently includes 3 tenant spaces. 1407 Solano, the subject tenant space, is one of the 3 spaces and measures 2,115 square feet in area. The previous use of the tenant space was a commercial restaurant, Cafe Valparaiso. Here's a street view of the property as it sits today. In project request, the applicant is seeking approval for a conditional use permit to allow the proposed music school use and also a parking waiver to waive 6 off-street parking spaces where 7 are required. Some business information. The proposed business is to operate under the official name Blue Bear School of Music. Blue Bear has operated a music school in San Francisco since 1971. They are a nonprofit education establishment as well. The operational hours of the business are proposed to be 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday through Saturday, and a maximum of 8 employees and 22 participants are expected to be on site at any given time. Conditional use permit. The applicant is seeking a conditional use permit approval to operate the music school. The music school is categorized in our zoning code as services instructional per section 2016-030. Instructional services which have potential impacts including but not limited to light, glare, parking, traffic, or noise may be referred to the commission for use permit review to ensure compatibility. Change of occupancy. It's important to highlight that the proposed change of use from commercial restaurant to music school results in a change of occupancy pursuant to fire code. The resultant change of occupancy is likely to trigger significant tenant improvements for the space and possibly the entire building. Building upgrades including fire sprinklings and ADA upgrades will be required as part of the building permit review. Economic development strategic plan consistency. Retail and restaurant businesses are the city's strongest sales tax generators per the EDSP. Goal number 3 specifically suggests that the commission target new businesses that are retail and restaurants or that provide a new amenity or choice business attraction. Since this business is not a restaurant or retail, the commission could conclude that the business creates a new amenity or choice in the city. Parking waiver. The previous use of 1407 Solano was a restaurant. Restaurants have a requirement of 1 space per 200 square feet of tenant space. Based on today's code, that would yield a total of 11 off-street parking spaces for the 2,115 square foot tenant space. The proposed instructional use, however, for the music school requires 1 space per 300 square feet of tenant space, or in this case, a total of 7 off-street parking spaces. 1 off off-street parking space is provided to the tenant site. Thus, the applicant is seeking the parking waiver to waive the remaining 6 off-street parking spaces. Staff has not received any correspondences regarding this project specifically, and the project is categorically exempt from CEQA review. And recommendation, staff recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission review the project and provide feedback to the applicant and staff. Draft findings and conditions of approval are included should the commission decide to take action. And that's it. And we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Any questions for staff?
I have one. So with respect to the calculation that the restaurant use would have been required to have 11 parking spaces, was there a parking waiver ever granted for the restaurant use, or?
I don't think in any recent times, because it had gone through different restaurant operators in the last 15 years. I think within that time frame, there hadn't been any parking survey or reduction or waivers.
So, and there wasn't ever like a discretionary approval that would have triggered it coming to the Planning Commission other than?
Yeah, we would have to go back and look in our historic records
Yeah.
to determine if there ever was a parking review.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious if it was like something that the city signed off on at some point, or if it was just kind of happened. So anyway, that's all. Thank you.
One question. It looks like the previous restaurant was pretty big, like 3 wide, right? So we're just using 1/3 of that? Is that?
So there were a couple different restaurants. So Zan's was on the corner for a number of years, and they closed in 2017. So that's one shell. Cafe Valparaiso, which is in the middle, and in this case corresponds to the red awning, that was kind of the primary tenant in the building. And then Solano Lighting, which is still in business, is the third tenant.
Oh, everything with the red awning, that was one restaurant?
That was one restaurant.
Yeah, that's right, because I've been in there under various incarnations.
Yes, it's very large.
Multiple incarnations of a restaurant.
Yeah.
So the subject part is just the one on the right? Is that it? Or what am I?
The red awning.
All the red
The whole thing, all the way across?
That was my question too. Looking at the floor plan, there's 8 windows that are shown in terms of the width. So there's the door on the right, 8 windows, which takes you to basically where the exterior, it looks like the old menu box was between the first and the second red awning. So is the entire space with all 3 red awnings the scope?
Okay.
The plan to me looks narrower than the whole
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah. So the interior space may be shifting, but we can defer that to the.
It would be these 2 spaces. It would end here. They're proposing this as a new space for a restaurant.
Later, under another application. Okay, fair enough. Got that. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions of staff before we turn it over to a formal presentation? Nope. Okay. With that, why don't you come on up and give us a formal presentation?
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I understand I have 5 minutes, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I'm Steve Savage. I'm the Executive Director at Blue Bear School of Music. We are a nonprofit arts organization, a 501c3. We've been active in San Francisco for 48 years, and our main campus is at Fort Mason Center. We serve over 2,400 students a year, including 500 youth in our after-school and outreach programs, many of which are in some of the most underserved neighborhoods in San Francisco. We have a staff of 8 and 42 part-time teachers. I am also an Albany parent, and I have 2 kids in the Albany schools, which has been a great experience. We have 2 of our San Francisco teachers that are also Albany parents. And we got together a while ago and thought we should have a school in Albany. We're all here, and we felt like the community needed it. So this is how we have come to this place now. We have been running classes at Church on the Corner for a while, but it's very limited in terms of what we can do there, and we would like to expand with the full kind of programming that we do in San Francisco, although this would be a considerably smaller site than our San Francisco site. We know how important education is in the Albany community, and there isn't easy access to music education outside of the schools at this time. Besides providing robust music program for ages not covered by the Albany schools, like toddlers and adults, and we have a Little Bears program, a very active toddler music program, we would be providing, I think, important opportunities for school-age kids and teens to supplement their in-school music education. Blue Bear was a sponsor of a recent Albany Music Fund benefit, and at that I had the chance to talk a little bit about our project and what we plan to do, and I was surprised a little bit. I got a big round of applause at the end of that, and I think the Albany music community understands the need and would be very supportive of the kind of things that we can offer here. We also are already contributors to school care from revenue at Church on the Corner. We've been in the last 2 Solano strolls, which are super fun. And we would expect to be active in the Solano Avenue Association and active participants in the Upper Solano Revitalization Plan, which was really exciting to us, that plan, and we would be in that area. We also have sliding scale and scholarship programs to benefit the low-income community. I want to respond to a few things from the Economic Development Strategic Plan. We would not be a direct source of sales tax revenue, that is true, but I do think we would be bringing shoppers onto Solano. People, especially parents, often like to go shopping while their kids are in music classes, and so I think we would be a benefit there. We would really activate this block, and be a thriving community. We plan a really fun, vibrant facade, thinking of a big guitar-playing bear. This community loves music, and I think would be proud to have our school here. Having music programs that are safe to walk to and safe to bicycle to and safe to push your stroller to, I think is a priority for parents, and that's the reason that this location is, I think, particularly good for us and good for the community. It'll also provide important services for youth and teens, which is part of the strategic plan. It was already mentioned, providing a new amenity or choice, and I certainly think that's where we fit in. The general plan also calls for intensifying uses, incorporating elements that make Albany a charming place. I think we would do both those things, both intensify usage, and I think we will have a charming school. Comments from the strategic plan, a couple of comments. Albany should concentrate on experiential businesses, and that would be us, and more youth centers for tutoring or recreation would also be us. So I hope you'll agree that Blue Bear School of Music would, on Solano, provide a valuable resource to the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Yeah, Commissioner Donaldson.
In the staff report, and the staff reported that you sort of are looking at our maximum occupancy of 8 employees and 22 participants. Will you, for me, elaborate on that? Like how would the student flow work? How long are the lessons?
Right. So
how does that all happen?
That would really be a maximum occupancy. That would be very rare, but I think typically we run half-hour lessons and hour lessons. Younger children typically need half-hour lessons and hour lessons, but we also, we're a community music school, so we do a lot of group programs, ensemble playing, and the Little Bears toddler program, and things like group guitar classes and group keyboard classes. So the plan calls for a couple of small classrooms, one large room, which would be for Little Bears and for ensembles and for small recitals, and then 3 private lesson rooms. So I think, and typically the usage is very light in the morning, although the toddler programs go on in the morning, and then after school and evening for kids and adults.
And middle of the day?
It tends to be pretty quiet between noon and 3.
But probably your peak load then would be right after school. So
yes.
Up until
up until 6 o'clock, and then I think some adult classes in the evening, singing, vocal classes primarily probably is a lot of what we do, and we're doing a few of those at Church on the Corner now.
Okay.
One question. You're confident the noise proofing measures are adequate and
We, of course, have lived with this our entire lives, and yeah, we're planning these modular music studio spaces that are what are used in universities, music departments, and music studios, and they're heavily soundproofed. So
I mean, I looked up the product. It looked good. So
yeah, they're pretty fabulous.
yeah, so hopefully that wouldn't bother anyone.
Right.
Any other questions for the applicant? Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any public speakers?
Oh, yeah, feel free to.
Come on up.
Hi, Liz Waddy.
Hi.
Jenny Holland.
Yes.
Muse Mom. It's been a long time. You were little. Hi, my name is Jenny Holland, and I'm the chairman of the Albany Arts Committee, but I'm also a former Blue Bear teacher. And I want to talk about the economic implications of having a place for musicians to work. Because there's very few musicians in the world that, I'm also an Albany resident, very few musicians in the world who can just live off of playing. And so from necessity, we all become teachers. Blue Bear is a great training institution. It's a great place to have a job. And as you're starting, when I was first starting out as a musician, and I worked for Steve in San Francisco the first 3 years of my musical career as a teacher. So I just want to say that that is one of the most hidden benefits of having a music school in your community, is that you provide income for musicians. And so musicians can stay in your community, musicians can thrive in your community, and then we have a vibrant music community. I know the Economic Development Committee will always be informing people of how the arts are a multiplier, and how Steve alluded to. People come and take their lessons, and their parents go and do their shopping, and because the lesson's only a half hour long, you're just going to Safeway, or you're just going to the shops on Solano. You're not going anyplace else. But it's also true that the teachers get invested in the place, as you know from where you work. You get invested in the neighborhood in which you work. And so I just want to do my little stump speech for supporting the musical community of the East Bay, supporting the musical teaching community of the East Bay, and that's what Blue Bear does. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else here to speak? Yeah, please come on up.
Hi there. My name is Joe Morgan. Good evening. And I am living at 973 Stannage Avenue. Because of that, I am always thrilled, overjoyed when a new business comes onto Solano Avenue. I deeply love Solano Avenue. And for that reason, I was wondering why exactly like when a new business comes, that isn't on the street already, comes in, especially, you know, as a teacher at Blue Bear also, I'm doubly thrilled. But I cited a report from A.T. Kearney. It's a recent report called The Future of Shopping Centers. And basically this is a blueprint for the mall of the future. And it interested me because malls are an interesting study in the last 30 years or so, depending on your area, because they are kind of the failed town square. I mean, it's a case where we get to see what's worked and what hasn't. What they found, what they realized, is that there was a need to reimagine and re-engineer malls and shopping centers, or town squares, to be what they called in consumer engagement spaces, or CESs, as they obviously would turn them into an acronym. Because they were saying the outmoded idea of malls as places for retailers to push out product offerings to a mass market needed to be replaced and approached where a mall is going to be designed around the needs and interests of increasingly diverse consumer markets, often segmented by age, ethnicity, et cetera. And in this way, it enables an ecosystem to come into play that needs to see themselves as places where people can engage with various experiences, various entertainment, and service people to congregate and convene. So malls in this way have to, in their view, become the new main street where people feel a real sense of community and belonging. And so, you know, to me, it's really about creating this ecosystem, drawing people together. And it's going to benefit, obviously, all the businesses that are in the area. And I honestly know of anything in my, 50 years in music that brings people together more robustly, more effectively, and more passionately than music. So thanks for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else here to speak on it? Did you? Okay, great. With that, then we'll go ahead and close public comment, and we'll turn it back to the commission for discussion. Anyone want to start? Sure. Sure.
I support this project. I think it's a good one. And I really don't have any concerns or objections at all. I can certainly, I feel strong I can make the findings for the parking exception. And I've watched this space have problems keeping a successful restaurant there for 9 to 20 years, perhaps, maybe at least 15. And it hasn't worked as a restaurant space, and I really would like to see it work as a music space. And I think also splitting the space up, I'm glad to hear now I understand the plans better, and I'm glad to hear they're doing that, because I think the corner where Zan's used to be, somewhat enlarged, might be a more viable restaurant space than the Valparaiso site ever was. I think that was its biggest problem, was it had too many seats and too strange a configuration. So I think it's a big undertaking to recondition the building, and I'm glad you want to do it and are willing to do it, and hope you have the capital to make it all happen and work out. It'd be great. I think it'd be a great project.
Yeah, I think I share pretty much all of Commissioner Donaldson's views on this. I think it's a great project. Thank you, Joe, for the description of the sort of experiential retail-ish world of the future. I think, we're all kind of trying to adapt to the new reality facing retail and what that means for, places like Solano, as well as shopping malls, et cetera. But I do think this is a great use to activate the space and bring in, really a diverse clientele, kids and adults. And although I carrying on a theme from the prior matter we heard, I would like to see more evidence about the parking analysis, mostly because, we heard from you that the period between noon and 3 is really the deadest time, and the parking analysis here was done at like 2 p.m. I would like to hear a little bit more about that, but knowing that this has been a restaurant forever, which really has higher parking requirements, and that's, it's a retail heavy space, and there's really nothing you could put in there that would meet the city's parking requirements, I don't think. So with that in mind, I think this is a very appropriate use for the space. And I agree that there's plenty of evidence that we need to be thinking more broadly about how to fill these kinds of retail spaces. I don't think having multiple storefronts on that block sitting vacant is a great economic driver for anything. And so I support this project.
Maybe just chime in really quickly. I similarly agree, and kind of two hats on this. One of the, I grew up in the Albany school district, and I grew up playing in band in Albany elementary and middle school, and really those were very important years of my life, and have kept many ties with a lot of folks who are in the music community in Albany. And I really agree that, we have to sort of walk the walk if we're going to talk the talk about being a sort of a complete community. And I think part of having a complete street in Solano is having a diversity of businesses. On that note, I know when we were doing the zoning sort of redo, a big part of this was activating Solano and not wanting the types of uses like, real estate offices or, dental offices that do have a bit of a deadening effect when you walk by those businesses on Solano, and wanting businesses that make you sort of either engage and go in or at least peek in and have that activation. And so I think that's really, to me, the crux of the question on this one. And I think there are many things where we can have it a little of both ways. And when I was looking at this, the first thing that came to mind instantly was actually the Tutu School that's up at the top of Solano, because at some level it's very analogous in terms of the type of programming offered. There's a certain hours of the day where you're going to be more heavily used. It's definitely a family-oriented sort of the arts use. But when you walk by the Tutu School, you look in and you're really engaged because you really can see what's going on there. And so you can have your coffee and look at how cute all the little girls are or whatnot. And so my initial thought on this, sort of nerding out as a planner on this, was more just critiquing the floor plan and thinking, could there be a way to sort of rejigger the front maybe of this space so that it isn't occupied right at the street with what feels very closed off? Because as it's designed right now, I don't think you would walk by and it would scream, we're a really cool music program that's really engaging, because there's an office and there's a reception and there's a security grill that comes down and then there's a little tight reception. And so although I'm super, super supportive of this and I think there is a very engaging component of this, I would maybe just throw in that caveat of maybe working with staff to relook at the floor plan to see if there's any way that either can be opened up in some way or shifted, or I don't know if there's any viability of having classes more visible to the street, or if nothing else, I don't know. I'm not an architect to reassess this, but if you have thoughts of a way that could be.
Unfortunately, sound mitigation is an issue with that.
Okay.
Windows transmit a lot of sound, so to have programming that doesn't have soundproofing, I think would be a problem. We do plan.
Could I ask you to just come up to the mic really quick when you talk to us? Thanks.
So sound mitigation, I think, is an issue. We do plan a really fun facade, and the architects put the window that you would be looking in, the wall that you would be looking into, and the back of the lobby, that there's a wall there that doesn't really need to be there, but we put it there so we could do some kind of really beautiful mural. Actually, I've already identified an artist that does this sort of music street scene kind of art that I would like to use. So I want there to be something beautiful there. We love the windows, and I want the space to be very inviting. So I'm hoping that will be, when we probably will have guitar teachers sitting in the lobby strumming their guitars sometimes, but I think for any kind of consistent programming, it's a problem.
Do you know if the walls by the reception area, are those like pony walls, like half-height walls, or are those going all the way up to the ceiling?
The reception area, that's a half-height wall.
That'll all be half-height?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So it sounds like that's sort of the spirit of what's going there, and I do think sort of architectural design, facade design, and how it's programmed at the front can really, again, give back to that spirit of an active public realm when people are walking by. And I do think there is some synergy that will definitely, I'm sure, come to places like, Gordo's and the like during the dinner time hour when this business is open. So overall, I think I'm supportive of this project.
Yeah, I agree 100% with everything that's been said. I think it's a great project. If we actually enforce the parking requirements for these kind of things, then no business would go in on Solano anywhere, because there is physically nowhere to put the parking and you're relying on street parking. So, it's really, we approve this because we like your project and like your use, and I think it'd be great to bring kids and families to the street. And I would hope that a number of them, a good proportion, would walk or bike or, and it's great that it's in a central location in the city. And this is our main street, and just bring more parents and kids down there is great. And it's serving great purpose, enriching our community. I have no problem with the parking reduction. It's the same as every business on Solano. They don't have parking lots. Nobody does, so not time to start enforcing that. I like the idea of it would be great if there was some way to have some visual animation going on with music playing and all that, but I get that the sound is driving the interior design. Occasionally, you could put some chairs out on the sidewalk and have the kids play or something, just for fun.
We have to do that some of the time. For sure.
Yeah. So otherwise, in terms of economic development, I think this is great. That restaurant has always struggled. It was probably not much of an economic engine at any point. We ate in there in probably 5 or 6 incarnations, and we always were pretty lonely, hoping they could make it. I sympathized with a lot of those restaurant owners. They were very sincere, good people, and I could see they were trying to make a go of it. But it was too big, and I think dividing this space into 2 is great, and I think a restaurant next door that was basically 2 spaces wide with the corner window, corner location could be a lot more successful, and that could become a much bigger economic engine. And while you're bringing the people to the street, then, it's, I think, a win-win for everybody. So really support what you're doing and can vote to approve this.
May I make 2 more comments?
Absolutely, Commissioner Thompson.
Okay, first of all, on parking, we didn't have anyone here tonight at all to talk about the parking, and I support the exception, and I have all along. But I want to make a couple comments. Ramona, right around the corner from you, is one of the most parked up streets in Albany, and we have had concerns from there, and Pomona down below it, we've had many concerns from there, from Church on the corner, the Zumba, Zumba?
Jazzercise.
What? Jazzercise caused, brought out the entire block and for us. So because no one's here tonight, maybe that's because this restaurant space is so dormant right now and the parking kind of has gotten lighter. But I want a couple of things we've talked about, and that is, had there been a number of speakers here raising concerns about the parking, we really want you to encourage you to have people walk and bring their bikes, and the bike racks are important. There are bike racks there. Employee parking, our parking studies in the past have shown that there's quite a bit of space almost all the time on Washington. Just, it's a long block, but just a block away. And so it would behoove you, I think, to, encourage your teachers of where you're going to park, and don't just try to jam in there close as you can get to work and go on to Ramona, but think about spreading out a little bit. Or going down, Key Route is getting more crowded now, but it is a double-sided, has lots of parking there. It's kind of a parking lot in a way, and a lot of people are using that more. But anyway, it's a real issue, and we have often had resistance from projects of this nature on Solano, and it'll bring people out. And it is a very strange shopping district because there is residential right immediately behind you. So that's one thought I have.
I live on Washington, on that block.
Oh.
You're right, there's
Oh,
often
is that right?
parking on my street up there.
Yeah, well, you can walk to work then. That's good. The other thing I have is, for the rest of the commission, and I had an email, some emails with Chris on this, Christopher on this. If this were retail, our zoning ordinance now would say we're automatically exempt the first 2,000 square feet. That's in our zoning ordinance. And we just did that a couple of years ago, and we just remade that revision. And we did it in part on what's in the economic development plan. We're trying to incentivize retail and mean that retail developments won't have to come here to get a parking exception unless they're over 2,000 square feet. It used to be 1,500 square feet. I'm wondering if that's working the way we'd intended, because this type of use is very much one we want to encourage on Solano. I mean, the economic development plan was sort of focused on uses that had sales tax, and they were kind of focused on that, and really the plan to focus on trying to preserve and encourage retail because retail is leaving. What I'm thinking is maybe retail is going to continue to leave, and it will always be a struggle in this day and age, and the sort of community services of this nature is the future. And I think maybe we should relook at that word retail in that parking exception and expand it so that we might cover a use like this.
Well, and just my thought on that too is when there's a reduction from what the existing, I mean, I kind of feel like right now that existing business has a grandfathered in effectively parking loss.
Yeah.
And I feel like that loss should be able to carry over to a different use. And if the parking standard is below that,
Yeah.
it seems like it should be an equal or lesser impact effectively from a parking perspective, and there shouldn't be a need for that regardless of the underlying land use category. I did just have one other quick note on this, just architecturally speaking as a recommendation before we wrap up and make a motion here, but it does look like on this building there are likely historic transom windows that are underneath the red awnings that go across that I imagine are probably pretty well intact.
They
Probably
exist and
beautiful. This
they
is
are
a
intact, yeah.
this is a sort of a gem of a building, in my opinion, that's been a little covered up, I think, over the years by the various different awnings that are there. And so I would highly encourage you at least to look at taking the awnings down and restoring the beautiful historic transom windows.
We're planning on taking the awnings down. Right now, those transom windows are covered with plywood, but the owners are planning to do major renovation. We actually won't get into this building for about a year because they're going to redo that front, those front windows, and they're building the bathrooms. Then they have to build the wall between the spaces and break out the electric, and there's a bunch of stuff, but they're planning on doing a lot of work to it. It's a beautiful building, I agree.
So I guess I would just encourage staff when they come in with their facade alterations to encourage them to restore the transoms such that they're visible, because I think that'll be a big value add on Solano as well. So with that, do we have a motion maker?
I'll move approval of planning application 19064, conditional use permit and parking waiver for the Blue Bear School of Music at 1407 Solano.
Second.
I'll second.
Great. On that, we'll take a roll call vote. All in favor? Aye. Seeing none opposed, that motion is approved 4-0.
Okay.
And we will move on. So congratulations. Next item up, if I can come back to my agenda.
This is the easy part.
Yeah, next, just those for tuning in now, next on our agenda is item 6.3, which we earlier at this agenda continued to the January 22nd hearing since we don't have a quorum, since two of us are recused. So we will then move on to item 7 on our agenda, which is new business, item 7-1, which is a resolution of intent for initiating amendments to the accessory dwelling unit regulations.
Yes, so we're taking the initial step tonight to have you adopt a resolution of intention to amend our regulations related to secondary residential units, which accessory dwelling units, they're one and the same. The commission may be aware that there was some recent legislation that was signed by the governor in October, and it becomes effective on January 1. It has basically the broad brushstroke effect of invalidating our current ordinance, and that's statewide. All local ordinances are going to get tossed out, and each jurisdiction is responsible for crafting new regulations that conform to the state regulations. So some of the highlights of that include the size. An ADU may be able to go up to 800 square feet. Requirements related to lot coverage and floor area ratio no longer apply. The state has established setback requirements that are actually less flexible than ours, so I would like to keep our existing setbacks given our lot characteristics that we have here in town. Additionally, a single-family residence may have both an ADU and a junior ADU after the first of the year. Garages may be converted, and off-street parking does not have to be replaced on site, so that's another big change. Our code and a number of codes have owner occupancy requirements. That too has been eliminated. There's a time restriction of applications to be processed within 60 days from the date of filing. That, again, is not something we have a problem with. We have a self-imposed deadline of 2 weeks, and we adhere to that pretty strictly. And lastly, ADUs built after the first of the year are prohibited from being used as short-term rentals, so they can't be used on Airbnb, HomeAway, VRBO, et cetera. They have to be used for long-term occupancy. So we've been to a couple seminars. We have external legal counsel that specialize in housing issues. Chris is part of a working group of planners in Alameda County, all kind of looking jointly at regulations that conform to the new requirements. And so with that, we will be coming back to you in the new year to work on regulations that adhere to the state law. One other thing to note, whatever is drafted and ultimately adopted has to actually get certified by HCD before we can implement it locally. So the review around the regulations is getting a lot stricter as well.
And just one quick question. What's the definition of a junior ADU? Because I looked in AB 68.
Have it on their agenda to define it.
Oh, okay.
Part of the
'Cause I
regulations.
was going to say, I just searched through all of AB 68 and I didn't see any definition for it.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting one. I believe the threshold, Chris, you can chime in. It's 150 square feet.
It can be built within, it needs to be either attached to an ADU or a main dwelling unit, and it's limited to just a wet bar, refrigerator, and then I think no stove, but you could have like a plug-in stove top. Yeah, it's kind of.
So basically saying it doesn't need like a full cooking facilities.
Correct. And it can share amenities with the main dwelling or ADU in theory.
With the main dwelling.
It's still considered density, like in terms of unit density?
Yes.
I believe that's correct. We can count it
Towards our housing.
towards our housing, towards our arena, even though it's not a formal ADU. It's got more limited facilities.
But it could be a room for rent then?
Yes, that's correct.
That's the idea then. Oh.
Long-term rental, not
Long-term rental.
not Airbnb type.
Yeah.
All right, so, and the action tonight is just initiation, so we can kick off the development of legislation locally.
Yeah.
Correct.
That's correct.
So not
Seems
much
like
to
a
discuss.
simple thing.
Yep.
We should just
Yep.
do it.
Great. Would you like to make a motion?
So we approve this, and then you come back to us with something more formal?
Yeah.
First meeting in January or something like that?
Probably
Early?
either the first meeting in January or the first meeting in, well, actually, I'm sorry, we have one meeting in January, so
Yeah,
it's more
that's
likely
right.
going to be in February.
And then it goes to HCD for review?
It would go through the typical review procedures, so Planning Commission, City Council, and then HCD has to certify it before
Well,
we
that's
can
right, because
actually
it's
implement it.
so it's a part of our zoning code. It would be an amendment.
Yes.
You'd be amending the zoning code. Then that would go to HCD. In the meantime, what happens to any applications you have for?
They will automatically default to state law. So
okay.
all the provisions of AB 68 would come into play.
And does HCD need to approve those units, or no?
No.
No, you approve them, but you use state law.
Right.
You use the state regulations to review the plans, and I see.
Just for the sake of those watching, there's no one here, so there is public comment is officially closed on this item. But do we want to just make a motion?
I'm happy to make a motion to approve Resolution of Intention 2019-12, initiating amendments to the ADU regulations for the city.
I'll second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Seeing none opposed, that motion is passed 4-0. That takes us on to item 8, announcements and communication. First up, 8-1. The next 2 meetings on December 25th and January 8th are canceled. And item 8-2, the 2020 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting schedule. Is that
Yes, so we have a schedule that we need to get to you, but right now, as was noted, we are canceling the first meeting in January, so that will be one less meeting. And the only other highlight is that our November meeting next year falls on Veterans Day, so we may need to shift our dates.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
The Planning Commission meeting next November falls on Veterans Day, which is a holiday.
Okay.
So we will have to look at our schedule at that point in time.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise, it's still the second and fourth
Oh, okay, so
Wednesdays.
we can enter them on our calendar, just the regular pattern?
Yep,
Okay.
starting January
So, okay.
22nd.
Okay, so you don't need to, you're not going to email us a list of the meetings?
I can if you would like.
Sounds like, so there's no issue except for November?
Yep.
Okay. Second meeting in November, then.
First meeting.
First meeting in November.
Second would be
First one,
canceled.
Yeah, second would be canceled for
You said
Thanksgiving.
that.
Thanksgiving.
First one, okay. All right.
Great. That takes us, next meeting up then is January 22nd. And with that, we are adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.